If I gave you a square of water the size of a small bedroom and told you it could quietly produce dinners for years, without daily feeding, without fancy equipment, without turning your backyard into a full-time job, you'd assume there's a catch. There is. The catch is that you were trained to think food only comes from places you don't control. A store, a supply chain, a price tag, a permission slip. But there's a different model. Older than modern agriculture marketing. Older than the idea that protein has to be expensive, fenced, and fragile. It's a living battery. You charge it once, with sunlight, plants, and a few starter animals, and then it keeps paying you back in harvests while it stabilizes itself. And the reason almost nobody is doing this in suburban backyards isn't because it's hard. It's because the simplest systems don't sell well. Today I'm going to show you how to build a backyard micro-wetland that turns weeds into eggs, algae into fish, scraps into fertilizer, and your yard into something that feels unfair. Not because you're gaming anything, because you're finally letting biology do what it's always done when humans stop interrupting it. And I'm going to do this in a way that actually matters, small enough to build, cheap enough to start, and realistic enough that you'll still be running it when the new hobby energy wears off. But first, you need one idea that will change how you see the entire project. Most people think a pond is a container, a hole that holds water. That mindset is why their ponds fail. That mindset is why they buy filters, chemicals, pumps, and frustration. A productive pond isn't a container. It's a stomach. A stomach has layers. It has microbes. It has a balance. It has inputs and outputs. If you build the stomach correctly, it digests sunlight and waste and turns it into edible surplus. So the goal isn't raise fish. The goal is build digestion. Because once digestion is stable, protein is just the byproduct. Now here's the part that sounds like a conspiracy, but is really just economics. If your backyard can reliably turn water plus sunlight into meals, you become harder to sell to. Not impossible, not off-grid, not a hermit, just less captive. And captivity is usually disguised as convenience. So instead of giving you a fantasy of free food forever, I'm going to give you a system with 3 promises you can actually verify. 1. It gets more stable over time, not less. 2. It requires less work in month 6 than it does in week 2. 3. It creates multiple harvests, so even if one thing underperforms, you still win. Fish is one harvest. Eggs can be another. Edible greens can be another. And the hidden harvest is the one people don't talk about, calm. The calm of knowing you can produce something real with your own property. Now let's build it from the inside out. The engine of this system is invisible, and if you skip it, you'll be fighting your pond forever. The engine is the microbial workforce. Tiny organisms that do one job. They turn toxic waste into plant food. In water, the main danger isn't dirty. The main danger is imbalance. When waste builds up faster than the system can process it, fish get stressed, oxygen drops, and suddenly your easy pond becomes a panic project. So we design the system so waste is never a problem. We design it so waste is the fuel. That means 4 functional layers, not 4 products. For jobs, Layer 1, producers. These are your fast-growing plants and algae. They capture sunlight and multiply. They're the pasture of the pond. Layer 2, grazers. These are the creatures that eat the producers, snails, small fish, insects, and in some setups, ducks that nibble greens and hunt bugs. Layer 3, harvest fish. The animals you actually want to eat, that turn all that low-value biomass into fillets. Layer 4, decomposers. Bacteria and fungi that recycle everything that dies, poops, or falls in. When those 4 layers are present, the pond stops being a tank you manage and becomes a loop that manages itself. Now, here's the first pattern interrupt. You do not need a huge pond. You need the right shape and the right edges. Most productivity in a pond happens in the shallow zone. The edges, the shelves, the places where plants root and tiny life explodes. A deep, steep-sided pit is impressive to look at. A shallow, shelf-based pond is impressive to eat from. So if you remember one sentence, make it this: more edge beats more depth. Now I'm going to walk you through a build that a normal person can do. And I'll give you 2 versions, the dig version and the above-ground version. Because not everyone can excavate, and not everyone wants a permanent hole. Both work. The biology doesn't care if your pond is in the ground or in a stock tank. as long as the layers are correct. Let's start with the simplest version to picture. Imagine an oval pond roughly 10 by 15 feet. Not because that number is magical, because it's big enough to buffer mistakes, small enough to build without turning your life into a construction site, and large enough to create real food. Depth, about 4 feet in the center if you live where summers get hot or winters freeze. But, and this is the secret, build a wide shelf around the perimeter. A shelf about a foot deep and 2 to 3 feet wide. That shelf is where you grow the machinery. Roots, bugs, microbes, filtration, baby fish habitat. If your pond has no shelf, you'll be forced to replace that biology with hardware. And hardware breaks. Biology repairs itself. Now location. Pick a spot that gets sun, but not punishment. Morning sun is great. All day full blast sun in a shallow pond can turn into overheating, low oxygen, and algae dominance. If you can choose, give it 6-ish hours of sun and some afternoon relief. And pick a spot where water already wants to be. The lowest point of your yard. The place rain naturally moves toward. Every time you fight gravity, you sign a lifetime contract with maintenance. Work with it once, and gravity works for you forever. Now let's talk materials. If your soil is heavy clay, you can compact and seal, but that's its own craft. For most people, a liner is the cleanest path. And you don't need a designer koi pond package. You need a durable barrier and protection under it. Underlayment can be old carpet, sand, or geotextile. Then the liner. Then rocks or soil to lock the edges. Now here's where most people get excited and mess up. They fill it with water and immediately dump in fish. That's like building a house and moving in before the walls are dry. The pond needs to cycle, which is a fancy way of saying the microbes need time to colonize every surface. So the correct order is water, plants, time, then animals. If you do it in that order, everything gets easier. If you reverse it, you become the life support machine. So you fill the pond. If your water has chlorine, let it sit or neutralize it. Then plants first. And I'm going to give you a plant strategy that doesn't rely on you becoming a botanical expert. You want 3 plant types. Rooted emergent plants for the shelf. Plants that grow with their roots in water and leaves above it. They act like a nutrient sponge and a living filter. Floating plants that cover part of the surface. They block excess sunlight, suppress runaway algae, and absorb nitrates. And submerged oxygenators. Plants that live underwater and provide habitat and oxygen during daylight. You don't need a jungle. You need coverage and balance. Aim for partial surface cover, not total. Because you want gas exchange and you want light in some places. Now the second pattern interrupt. Algae is not the enemy. Algae is the first crop. In a young pond, algae shows up before stability does. Your job isn't to kill algae. Your job is to make sure algae becomes food instead of becoming a suffocation blanket. And the way you do that is by adding grazers. This is where the system becomes different from a typical pond guide. Most pond guides assume you'll buy fish feed. This system assumes you'll grow feed. We're going to grow feed so aggressively that the fish are harvesting your pond for you. So let's talk grazers. In a backyard micro-wetland, your grazers can be a combination of small native fish that reproduce, snails, aquatic insects, and in some setups, ducks, if your space and local rules make sense. Now I'll be careful here, because ducks are powerful, but they're not magic. Ducks add fertility. They stir the water. They convert bugs and greens into eggs. But they can also overload a small pond if you run too many, too early, with no plant buffer. So here's the rule. Start with plants. Then let the pond green up. Then introduce life gradually. If you want ducks, think small. A couple ducks, not a flock. And give them access in controlled windows at first. Because the system should feel like it's running itself. If it feels like you're constantly correcting it, you're overstocked somewhere. Now fish. I'm going to frame fish choices in a way that keeps you out of trouble. There are easy, legal, almost everywhere fish, and there are fast-growing but regulated fish. Your safest path is to use species that are already common in your region and permitted for private ponds. This isn't just about rules. It's also about survival. Local species are adapted to your temperature swings. They can handle your winters and your heat. The goal is not fastest growth on the internet. The goal is survives and reproduces with minimal babysitting. So think in 2 categories. Category 1, a reproducing base fish. something that can create a self-renewing population, so the pond doesn't reset to zero every year. Category 2, a harvest fish. Something you can grow out and eat that turns that base biomass into meat. In some regions, people use sunfish-type fish as a base and a larger predator-type fish as harvest. In other regions, people use catfish-type fish as harvest. The exact species depends on local legality, climate, and what's available. But the structure stays the same. Base life that renews, plus a harvest animal that converts. Now costs. You can do a version of this with a few $100s, or you can spend thousands. The difference is not quality. The difference is how much labor you want to replace with money. If you're digging by hand, you'll spend more time and less cash. If you rent a machine, you'll spend more cash and less time. But here's what matters. A grocery bill is a subscription. This is an asset. Even if it takes you a season to get it balanced, you're building something that stays. Now the part everyone actually wants. What do? Week by week. Week 1, you shape the pond, add underlayment and liner if needed, fill it. Then you add plants. Not a few decorative pieces. Enough to claim territory. Put emergent plants on the shelf. Drop submerged plants in deeper areas. Add a small patch of floaters. Then you walk away. Not emotionally, just physically. You don't manage the water. You let it establish. Week 2 to week 4, you observe. Water changes color. That's normal. You might see cloudiness. Normal. You might see algae. Normal. You're waiting for the pond to start behaving like an ecosystem instead of a container. Now here's a mistake that tanks beginner ponds. They see algae, panic, dump in chemicals, crash the microbial layer, and then wonder why everything is unstable. No chemicals. No algae seeds. This is a food system. You don't poison your soil to grow a garden. Don't poison your water to grow a pond. Instead, you add life that eats the algae. After the plants have rooted a bit, you introduce your first grazers. A small number. Not because you're timid. Because you're training the pond to scale. Then you wait again. Because the pond has to build capacity before you load it. Month 2, you add harvest fish. And you do it with a number you can defend. Understocking is forgiving. Overstocking is brutal. If you're unsure, start low. You can always add more later. What you cannot do is undo a crash without stress, time, and loss. Now feeding. If your goal is maximum speed, you can feed. If your goal is maximum independence, you want the pond to produce a meaningful portion of its own feed. So here's the middle path I recommend for a realistic self-sufficient system. Feed lightly at the beginning to reduce stress while the food web builds. Then taper feeding as you see natural forage increase. How do you know forage is increasing? You see more insect life. You see tiny movement at the edges. You see small fish chasing. You see birds interested. You see the pond acting alive. Now let's talk about the edible plants part, because this is where most backyard pond videos leave money on the table. The pond edge can grow food. Not just filter plants. Food plants. And I don't mean you turn it into a swamp. I mean you grow things that like wet feet in designated zones. You can create a ring of moist soil and shallow water where plants thrive and pull nutrients. And those nutrients came from sunlight and waste, which means you're harvesting fertility that would otherwise become algae. So when you harvest greens from the edge, you're not just getting food. You're controlling nutrient load. You're doing maintenance by eating. That's the kind of maintenance you actually keep doing. Now timeline. When does it start paying you back? If you set this up in spring, you can be collecting eggs the same season if you add young layers early enough and your setup supports them. Fish harvest depends on species, temperature, and whether you're feeding. But a well-designed system doesn't require you to win fast. It wins by not quitting. It's the opposite of a hack. By the end of the first season, you should see obvious proof of life. Clear zones, stable behavior, plants expanding, fish visible at feeding time, edge life exploding. By year 2, it gets dramatically easier because the pond isn't starting anymore. It's established. It has memory. It has resilience. And that's when the emotional switch happens. Because you stop seeing it as a project, and you start seeing it as infrastructure. Now winter, because if I don't address winter, this becomes just another internet fantasy. Cold climates change the game, but they don't end it. Fish can overwinter under ice if oxygen and gas exchange are handled. The danger in winter is not cold. The danger is suffocation from trapped gases and depleted oxygen. So your winter plan is simple. Keep a small opening for gas exchange if it freezes. Prevent total snow cover for long periods if you can, because light matters. And reduce inputs going into winter. Don't overload the pond with waste right before everything slows down. Your fish metabolism slows. Your microbes slow, so you don't push the system when it's in low gear. Now, if you're in a warm climate, your winter problem is different. It's overheating and low oxygen in peak summer. The fixes are also biological: shade from plants, partial surface cover, not overstocking, and a structure that has depth refuge. Now I want to go to the real reason this kind of system changes people. It's not the fish. It's not even the eggs. It's what happens to your decision-making when you know you can produce. When prices jump, you don't spiral. When supply chains get weird, you don't doom scroll. Because you have a small, quiet proof in your yard that food can be local again. Not local like a brand. Local like your footsteps. Now, I'm going to make this even more powerful by giving you the simplest starter version that almost anyone can do. Even if you rent, even if you can't dig, even if you're not ready to commit. This is the above-ground micro version. A stock tank or a sturdy container set in a place with morning sun. You add a small shelf inside using bricks or a platform so you can root emergent plants. You add floating plants. You let it cycle. Then you add small grazers. Then you add a small number of harvest fish appropriate for your climate and legality. Is it going to produce the same as a full pond? No, but it teaches you the entire system in miniature. And once you've run the miniature version for one season, you're no longer guessing. You understand the rhythm. You understand how quickly plants grow. You understand how water changes. You understand what stable looks like. Which means if you decide to build the full version, you're building with confidence, not hope. Now let's talk about the one thing that will make or break your results. It's not what fish you choose. It's not what plants you choose. It's stocking density and patience. Most people fail because they treat the pond like a machine. They keep adding inputs to force outputs. A pond is a relationship. If you load it too fast, it pushes back. So the winning strategy is start lighter than you think. Let the biology scale up. Then increase slowly. That's how you get a pond that's boring in the best way. A pond that doesn't need you to rescue it. A pond that keeps working when you're busy, sick, traveling, or simply tired. Now I'm going to give you a harvesting philosophy that keeps the system from collapsing. Never harvest to zero. Always leave a breeding base. Always leave the smallest life. Because the smallest life is the feed factory. When you harvest, harvest surplus. Harvest the animals that have already converted the system's productivity into your meal. If you treat the pond like a bank account and only pull interest, it keeps paying. If you treat it like a one-time payday, you reset the clock. Now this soft CTA part, but I'm going to earn it. If you've been watching this thinking, this feels like the kind of thing I should have learned in school, you're not wrong. Most people were never taught systems. They were taught products. And when you understand systems, you start seeing them everywhere. You stop asking, what should I buy? You start asking, what can I set up once that keeps working? So here's what I want you to do. Not tomorrow. Not someday. This week. Pick one of the two versions. The full pond plan, if you're ready. Or the stock tank micro version, if you're not. And do the first step only. Just the first step. Mark the location. Or place the tank. Or sketch the shape. Because once the first step is real, the rest stops being a maybe. And if you want, tell me in the comments what you're building. Dig pond or above ground micro. Also tell me your climate. Hot, mild, or freezing. Because the best species and the best timing depends on that. And I'll help you adapt the plan. And if this video flipped a switch for you, if you can already picture yourself stepping outside, checking the edge plants, seeing fish movement, collecting eggs, and feeling that quiet, we're fine feeling, subscribe. Not because you need another channel. Because once you start building living infrastructure, you're going to want the next system too. The pond is not the point. The point is what happens after you prove you can produce. That's when you stop feeling like the future is something that happens to you. And you start feeling like it's something you can build.